Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Grand Arbiter Augustin IV, probably the final boss of EDH. This is a deck that comes to us from Shirok, who wants to bring this deck out of retirement to teach some people a lesson of what happens when you mess with Stax. So the immediate warning is this is not going to be an episode for everyone. I know there is an online sentiment that Stax is the worst thing you could do to another person, but I'm here to tell you that strategies are valid. You are going into a game of Commander to win, and that's okay, that's fine. And if you find yourself losing to Stax a lot, maybe stick around. Maybe we can talk about, the deck's weaknesses by talking about its strengths. When you understand an archetype, when you understand where it is going and what it's trying to do, it enables you the ability to actually beat it. And I think that's really, really important. And we think about this a lot in more competitive formats like 60 card formats and one-on-one formats where you really got to know your matchups to beat them. But generally, I think there is this attitude in Commander that you should just show up and you're just gonna do your darndest to win. And if you're really trying to win, you gotta know what you're up against so that when someone slams down Grand Arbiter, you know how to deal with it. So we're going to go into this deck. I really like it. They already have some sideboard cards that I'll take a moment to talk about. These are cards that might be coming in. But before that, let's take a look at the commander and see what they do for our deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So avert your eyes, those who are weak-willed. This is Grand Arbiter Augustin IV, a really flavorful Azorius creature from the plane of Ravnica, and I really like them because they're so awful. I really think the Azorius are displayed very well as just the worst guild and the most oppressive one, and Grand Arbiter here is doing the work. They are a 4-mana 2/3 human advisor, and they have 3 simple lines of text. The first one that says white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. This is a pretty straightforward, what we now see as a praetor ability, like Shieldred and the like, where they give your opponents a negative debuff and the positive version to you. Grand Arbiter says your opponent's spells cost 1 more, and that your spells generally cost at least 1 less. Of course, as many will know, white spells and blue spells will each get 1, and white and blue spells will get a full reduction of 2 because they match both criteria. So on the whole, this is just kind of a basic look. Like, this is all Grand Arbiter does. But the reason Grand Arbiter is very much so feared is because this card represents a play pattern called Stax. I believe it was actually coined after the stacks of cash you needed to play it, but now it sometimes takes this idea of smokestacks, which is a card not in this deck. Don't worry about that. The idea is a preventative deck, a deck that stops your opponents from doing basically anything to progress their gameplay, by strangling their resources so they do nothing, by stopping, like full stopping effects from occurring, and preventing attacks or spell casts in total. So like, basically you want to hold them in a stranglehold where they can't move, and then you are given an obnoxious amount of time to find whatever you win. And Grand Arbiter being kind of just this poster child of the first taxing effect of making your opponent's spells cost more, making it more difficult for them to double spell, making it easier for you to get more and more lock pieces out by reducing the mana cost of your spells, is kind of, maybe not the glue that holds the deck together, but the ramp you use to jump into victory. I don't know if this works as an analogy, but I'm sticking by it. So as not to lose the players who see these kind of decks and are immediately mortified, I want to speak to what the deck does from the angle of how to beat these kind of decks, or maybe what these decks tend to lack, just to get it out of the way. See, the main basis of a stack deck is this. Control is very, very difficult to kind of work traditionally in Commander. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at control decks in other formats, one of the primary ways that they interact is counter spells, right? Counter magic. Spells that will literally stop your opponents from doing the big plays you want them to. This is also coupled with board clears, which are in Commander, but also targeted removal. You know, hyper efficient removal that allows you to surgically pick off your opponent's plays. But in Commander, those two abilities, specifically counter magic and direct removal, are not even in a way, right? You're using a one spell for one of your opponent's permanents or one of your opponent's spells. This is what we call a 1-for-1. You've exchanged one resource for another. However, in Commander, you have 3 opponents, and therefore you are going down in the grand scheme of things. This is what we usually talk about when we say a 3-for-1 card, because that's kind of the rate we expect in Commander. You want a card that deals with 3 separate cards, or a card that one resource that deals with 3 resources to maintain parity on a long enough scale. So, in order to counteract that, control decks in Commander try to find alternative ways to stop their opponents from playing the game and make the most value, you know, out of the cards you have. And a really traditionally straightforward way of looking at that is a card like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. This is a card I really like in a number of white decks. Like, if you're playing white in Commander, I really do say that you should play this card. It is incredibly powerful. And to bring back to what I was saying before, Thalia is the poster child because she represents this kind of, she reaches far further than the card implies. Like, she is much more valuable than 2 mana. What do I mean by that? Is that if you play Thalia on any given game, and if she sticks around for a little bit, you can just start jotting down how much additional mana she drains from the table. And you can include yourself if you'd like. And that means, like, you know, every non-creature spell they cast, every non-creature spell you cast, you just do little ticks. And I would guarantee that in a regular game, it's a higher number than you'd expect. The longer she stays, this could be 6 mana, this could be 12 mana, this could be upwards of 20 mana. It doesn't seem like that's the case, but it can happen really, really quickly. When each of your opponents are casting instants and sorceries, even not on their own turns, Thalia just gets out of hand really, really fast. Therefore is worth way more than the 2 mana she kind of stands in for. This is also equivalent to something like Eidolon of the Rhetoric, a card I really like, that once again it says one player can't cast more than 1 spell a turn. Sorry, each player can't cast more than 1 spell a turn, which also has this kind of stranglehold ability by stopping your opponents from maximizing their resources. Even if they have 20 mana, if they have only 1, spell that they can cast per turn and they don't have instant or flash spells, they are locked down, proverbially, from playing their hand out. So they could be drawing 3 cards a turn and you don't care because they're only getting the 1 turn. These 2 cards also have one other element that's worth noting about how Stax works before we talk about further how to stop this, in the essence that they are kind of invisible effects. What do I mean by that? I mean, you never quite know how good Eidolon of Rhetoric really is until you talk to your opponents after the game. Likewise, same thing with Thalia. Because I might have a hand, right, that has a lot of low mana non-creature spells, and Thalia of Guardian of Thraben is just holding me back from just throwing my hand out in one, like, succinct way. Like, this is stopping me from casting 3 to 4 spells. But you don't know that, because I'm not going to volunteer that information, and I might be instead casting, a 4-drop creature instead of all of those spells, holding this like array of spells into my hand and keeping myself like back, and you won't know that, right? It's invisible knowledge. Likewise, when you have a Eidolon of the Rhetoric kind of spell, you just don't know how many spells your opponents could be playing. Like Thalia, they're most likely going to play the highest mana cost spell that has the greatest impact for one spell. But even then, like, maybe they have 2 spells they could cast a turn. Maybe they have 3 spells they cast a turn. Maybe they have combos of cards that just do not work because of Eidolon on the Rhetoric works. We'll be getting back to that in additions, but there's this invisible strength of Stax that people don't usually see. A lot of it, you know, is like people responding to cards like Winter Orb that locks down all of their lands or things like that, which I might be exasperating, but it's that invisibility that has a lot of it. So, I've talked a lot about the kind of concept of Stax, and still before we go into the deck, I want to speak to the people and say, okay, how do you beat this? How do you stop this? You go and you see your friends, and one of them brings out Grand Arbiter, they bring out Stax. How do you beat them so you don't have to deal with it? Well, the very straightforward way is you leverage 2 main things. The first one is that you are in a multiplayer game, and if you do pit 3 players against 1 player, you will take them out. Like, Grand Arbiter only has so many really, really powerful plays, and if you and your other teammate, I'm gonna say teammates, the other opponents that are working with you have a diverse range of attack patterns. You know, someone's coming in with creatures, someone's coming in with direct damage, someone has counter magic to protect these plans. You're going to knock that player out, bar none. There's just not a way around it. Unless this deck is playing against incredibly low power players or low power decks, you don't have a chance. So your primary way of, you know, dealing with them is actually to lean into that idea that Stax sucks and say, hey, Stax sucks, get that person. I think that's perfectly fair. I would never be mad as a Stax player if someone did that, because that is a very key way of taking that. However, you might be in a situation where your opponents don't want to work with you, or you don't have the means to really put that on the table. Think of like combo decks, think of like engine decks. Like if you're generating 6 clues a turn as your main game plan, and you look at your opponent, the other 2 opponents, and you go, hey, let's work together and get the Stax player, except for I can't do anything because I have like 1/1s and a bunch of clues, so you guys do your best. Like, it's not gonna go over well. Likewise, if you're combo and you're like, ooh, getting close, and you turn to your opponents and they're like, we're not gonna help you because we think you're a threat and the Stax player might hold you back, you get into the situation where you might need to take them out yourself. And there's one really key thing to know, and you can see this if you're looking at the deck right now, and there is no solution for this, is that Stax is a game of finding the right card at the right time. Because a lot of these cards, let's take a look, cards like Blind Obedience, especially cards like Rest in Peace and Stony Silence, or even Suppression Fields. These cards are so good, but do literally nothing on the wrong board, right? Rest in Peace is like one of those cards that the floor in a commander game is pretty high. It's likely someone's using their graveyard, so slamming Rest in Peace is going to do work. However, if you're sitting there and you don't play graveyard, like your green-white aggro stompy or your like banked counters, like Rest in Peace means nothing to you, and therefore your Stax opponent wasted a play in essence, right? Or if they didn't cast it, they've got a card in their hand that's just there. It's not helping them, it's not something they want to play, it just sucks. And that is an opportunity for you to get some advantage, some tempo against them, while they are, you know, trying to get the cards they need to stay in the game, trying to leverage Enlightening Tutor, Mystic Tutor, any other like Idyllic Tutor, tutors or card draw or card selection, in order to desperately find what they need to lock down the board and stop their opponents from knocking them out. You have time. And the last thing I'll say about this, before we go into the deck itself, is that players might feel like what I just said was kind of strange, that last part, because, you know, but you just cursed, you just said they have tutors. So if they have tutors, they're of course going to get the cards to stop the board. But that's not necessarily true, because the hardest part of Stax is not only do you need to stop the current board, which is straightforward, but you need to stop the future board. Cards like Thalia and Guardian of Thraben feel really strong when they're like your second tax piece, your commander's out, you know, you're just really pressuring your opponents. But as the first piece down, they do next to nothing. So yes, your opponent is really keen on grabbing something that's going to enable them to stay in the battlefield. Something like Grasp of Fate off of that Enlightened Tutor, so they can get 3 permanents out and hopefully like stabilize. But that's not them progressing their game state. That's them stopping you from beating them down. And if you keep them on the back foot, they will not be able to. All right. So that was quite a bit to go over. If you have more thoughts about Stax and you have opinions and questions, put them in the comments, because I do love talking about this. I love strategizing against specific decks, and maybe I should make a video of that. But let's talk about Shirok's deck, because they are here for help, and I've just taught people the directions to think about to be. So mainly the deck is very, very strong. I really like it. It hits so many key pieces. If you're building Stax, this is a fantastic starting point. It has almost all of what I consider key pieces. It has really nice redundancy. It's a little low on lands, but you don't mind that, because this is a deck that aims to be low to the ground and work, kind of well with what it has. We'll get back to that. And the curve itself is really smooth. So generally, I do like that. I will say, the things that stick out to me are cards that I feel are just overpriced for what they do, especially when leveraged against our lack of lands, right? So for example, what I'm talking about very much so is like Spell Tithe Enforcer. So Spell Tithe Enforcer is like a really cool Stax card. It implies that as your opponents get further and further into this situation where they have less and less mana and you're really holding their lands back and they can only cast 1 spell or something like that, right? That now when it's time to cast the spell, they have to give up a resource. It's very close to the black not Painful Memories. Maybe it is Painful Memories. The black spell that forces you to discard or lose life as you. There's a bunch of them. Oppression is probably the easiest one. So it feels very much so like that. And the ceiling is high because you're like, oh, I'm getting rid of their permanents. They're gonna be slowly ripped out of this game because they have to overpay on resources. But this is just not true. There's 2 elements to this. Let's talk about really the part that I think is you got to think about when you put cards in this, and then fundamentally the other half of it. So the easy part of this is the only time a card like this does work is when the deck is winning really hard. This is win more, right? You need to pressure, like I said before, you need to pressure their mana. You need to pressure the cost of their spells. You need to deal with their lands. You need to make sure they don't have a lot of permanents, because if they have a lot of permanents, they don't care if they're sacking. You got to put them in a situation where they're like, oh, I really need to sack a permanent and it's gonna suck, right? And frankly, you also need them to be casting multiple spells, because otherwise they don't mind. They'll just pay the 1 mil extra mana, and the pressure of sacking a land every time also won't add up. So this in essence needs a lot, and therefore it's win more in a deck with 34 lands. Just toss it out. But I also think it's really important to note that this particular card is really bad because it just nombos with everything you're trying to do. Because one of the big things about how Stax works is you leave your opponents with useless permanents. Think about playing Stony Silence against your Clue opponent, right? Think about having Ghostly Prison against your token opponent. Think about just locking down your land's opponent's ability to untap their lands. These are all normal things that Stax wants to do. Notice they leave your opponents with a bunch of useless permanents, and you play this and you go, hey, you're gonna have to sacrifice a permanent, and they go, okay, that's fine. I have something to do with my Clue tokens. I have something to do with my extra lands. I have something to do with my Sapperlings. Finally, they say, I can get rid of this trash. The aristocrat player loves being back in the game all of a sudden, right? So this is not just a win more card. It is, in essence, a terrible trap. I'm not gonna harp on every other card to that level, but this one really stuck out at me as one that I really like. I think this card is really cool, but it is absolutely a trap. Likewise, Archangel of Tithes also just kind of feels like a card that's just outperformed by all of the other versions of this card. We have Ghostly Prison, we have Propaganda, we have Sphere of Safety. All three of those can be tutored, whereas this cannot. So the only thing this really has is the fact that it's kind of a beater and kind of has this weird attacking thing. But if you want the propaganda effect, you can attack with it. Like, it's just not good. I think it's a neat card, but this is definitely not the kind of deck that you want to do it, to use her in. And also, just at that mana cost, it's too much. Likewise, I think Norn's Annex, even though realistically you're going to be paying 3 and not 5 for this, is still probably another really bad version of this effect. It's just too easy for your opponents to get around by paying life, something that you do not pressure, right? So the only way this works is if one of your opponents is like a group, not group hug, can't remember what they're called, my goodness. I was at a family get-together this weekend, I'm a little fried. It is Group Slug. A Group Slug effect allows you to, like, one of your opponents is Group Slug, and they have something out that's damaging your opponents, and all of a sudden they can't pay for Norn's Annex. Cool. That's probably not going to happen. You're not pressuring their life totals. They'll pay the 2 life to attack you every single time, and they won't mind. And once again, you just have other versions of it. So easy toss. Mindlock Orb probably feels just a little overpriced for what it does. Sigil of the Empty Throne, likewise. You'll notice the trend. I'm just picking at the highest mana card costs cards, and I'm saying this is also just too much work. It's 5 mana. Even with the cost reduction on these spells, it's too much mana. It's too clunky. If Grand Arbiter is pressured out of the game, which is very, very possible, you've got a 5 mana spell that does nothing until you cast other enchantments. And I don't really see that being particularly good. Likewise, maybe this is a bit mean because I really do like this card. Lightmind Field is very, very close to being just another Ghostly Prison effect, but worse because it costs more mana. Terrible because your opponents just do not attack into it unless they are benefiting from it. I'm thinking Aristocrats, when all of a sudden, after locking their, Viscera Seer out of the game by like using a effect that stops it from using its ability, you give them a way to destroy their own creatures, right? Or, of course, the 6/6 flyer just comes at you and does not care, right? This is just another card that, really cool, very clunky, just not effective. Like, this is really good paired with like No Mercy style effects, or blue has this, I can't remember what it is, but when a creature hits you, it gets bounced back into hand. Like, if you put 2 of those together, then this gets better because you have preventative measure for big creatures, and you have preventative measure for token creatures, and I like that, but just by itself, it's kind of trash. I think Kismet is okay. Once again, I feel like we get this effect at lower mana. Like, putting this next to Authority of the Consuls really, really sucks. And I know they don't do the same thing, but just like, you do have to kind of see with the few slots that you have what you're going to do, and it's something that I don't particularly like. Opalescence is not something I like, but I know it's in there for flavor. No one's ever played Opalescence without just like loving the flavor of it, or wanting to cast Humility and just break people's brains. Like, that's the kind of the 2 ways of doing it. So I know I won't be able to get that out, but it is worth noting. I think that's generally it. There's a lot of middle cards that are worth considering to kind of push upon. Like, I feel like Render Silent is probably pretty bad. Counterspell could be Arcane Denial, and it would be pretty beneficial to you. I think you could play Pongify and the like over some of these, but these are really, really small changes. So I want to go straight into these sideboard cards real fast and then move on to my additions to kind of not make this episode 6 hours long. So looking at the sideboard cards as options. Dark Depths is here. I have to assume Dark Depths is being paired with the, I believe it's Thespian Stage, right? That automatically creates a 20/20 by putting these 2 together. I don't think that's good enough. I think you're still extremely vulnerable to like, you know, exile effects, Swords to Plowshares, and like things like that that can interact with a 2020 flying indestructible creature. The fact that it still attacks twice really, like, to take out a player really sucks. It's something I think is kind of ignored. And it also gives, like, by having this one big attacker, it kind of turns on, without evasion, I should say, like outside of flying, it kind of turns on all your opponent's flying creatures, and all of a sudden they can chump block. Like, once again, you're enabling your opponent to stay in the game. I think if you had like something else to do with the 2020, I'd like it a lot more, but this feels like a very slow version to defeat all your opponents. And objectively, even though people might be mortified by this, people don't like Stax, attacking with Linvala like a million times is pretty much the same as attacking with Merit Lage a bunch of times, right? Like, in both situations, in order for this plan to work, your opponents have to not be able to interact it. And in this deck, when your opponents do not interact with you, like they're locked out, they are locked out. There is no there's no coming back from it. So Merit Lage could be a 1/1 and you'd still be pretty happy. So I think it doesn't stand out being particularly strong. Island Sanctuary is really, really cute. I don't know to what degree I think it functions. I've never played with this card. I've been interested in it, but the fact that you do not have to constantly do this really makes it pretty strong and allows you to occasionally invest in it when you're feeling attacked. There's a pun in there, but until then, I think it's just okay. It feels just like another one of those cards that is sometimes good, and I think I prefer like a Holy Day equivalent where I could just use it once and be done with it, and use it at the correct time, rather than this kind of investment where it might be over investing resources when your opponents think of other plans to take you out, potentially, right? Aether Barrier looks like kind of my response to Spelltithe Enforcer. However, this is only creature cards, so I don't think that's good enough. I think it's cute. I think it's much more interesting early because you can get it out off of Soul Ring, and I think that's much more powerful. But I think late game, it's not going to feel particularly good, and you're not going. Council's Judgment is fine. I don't think this is the kind of deck that wants to use this. This card is way better in other decks where you aren't the one that everyone hates, but you are the one that everyone hates. So this is going to be used against you, unfortunately. If this wasn't starting with you, perhaps that would be different, but I can see your opponents just taking out a key piece. Like, you need your opponents to not like each other for this to be good, and I don't think you're cultivating that kind of environment. Glow Rider's fine. I don't really know if you need the next version of this. I think you have enough, but if you put this in, I don't think it'd be terrible. Monastery Siege, I think, is too much, really. Like, I know you're mainly using it for dragons, but the fact that you can put it on cons is cool, but both sides of this card don't particularly feel that good. Like, they feel okay. I think this would be better as Karmic Justice or something else at a certain point, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Planeswalker's Mischief is fine. I guess this is a win condition. I can't speak to this. Up to you. Listen to your heart. Trinity Sphere is fine. Once again, I think this is good. No problem there. Armageddon, people will hate you forever, and I think that's great. I just don't know if this is the kind of deck that wants Armageddon, because it doesn't really benefit from not having any lands. I don't know. Like, other decks can like set up a board that you Armageddon and then you win off of, like enough creatures and stuff. What you set up is kind of a really frustrating board, and then if you're Armageddoning, I feel like the lock is already there, and therefore you don't need to Armageddon. I could be wrong about that. Obviously, to an extent, this can be still good against certain decks, but I think this is probably win more, which is a weird thing to say. Factor Fiction, I'm going to give you a better option. Frozen Ether, I like this, once again, more than the alternative of Kismet, even though they're the same mana. Hold on, this is on me. Excuse me, this is the same card. This is on me. Why do I like this and I don't like the other? I guess don't play either or play both. I'm not sure about that. Helm of Obedience, really, really great. For those who don't know, rest in peace, Helm of Obedience takes out a player every single time by putting 1 mana into Helm of Obedience, and they never are able to mill a card, so it decks them out. Is that enough? I don't know. I think you need to run something like this in a deck like this, but if you don't want that kind of combo, you have to think about Thassa's Oracle, and Helm of Obedience is way more friendly to players than Thassa's Oracle, so I think that's fine. I would play it. Narset Transcendent feels like it doesn't belong in this deck. It is far too cute, and if you want draw engines, you have way better one. Opposition also doesn't belong in this deck. You need a tokens deck or a creature token generation ability that this deck just can't really do at the level that Opposition gets good at, so you might as well not worry about it. Gilded Lotus, fine. I'd rather you just play a land. Don't play this before you play your 35th land. And Immortal Sun is okay. Once again, a lot of, like, this last piece of text doesn't matter. This is nice. The rest are kind of cute. I think, honestly, it's going to be okay, and it's up to you if you really want to play it. Like, that one's close. It's a nice finisher, but I'm going to give you alternative. Okay, I've gone pretty quickly over all of that. I'm trying to be time aware these days, but I do want to go into some additions that I think are really fun, really interesting, and some of them kind of silly. I've saved the boring ones to the end because everyone knows what I'm going to suggest for the boring, classic, powerful card stuff, so that'll be at the end. So don't feel like I've forgotten about Esper Sentinel. It's at the end. So, Teferi Time Raveler. I don't know of a world that this card isn't magnificent in a deck like this. It really shuts down an entire angle of your opponents to play around. It combos really well off of a board clear or any form of Ghostly Prison effect because it makes up for the main problem that Planeswalkers can't be attacked. Sorry, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing Ghostly Prison doesn't protect this because Ghostly Prison protects you. I believe Sphere of Safety protects Planeswalkers, but I could be wrong. Yes. So, not Ghostly Prison propaganda, but a board clear, something that taps down or only enables a certain number of attackers, like Crawl Space or something like that, allows Teferi to be very good. This is also a card that combos with one of the cards I'll show, but just generally locks out opponents out of playing the game. It turns off so many like cascade effects or effects that allow you to cast a spell on attack or anything like that. Like, if it's not barely played, it's really difficult to get through with Teferi. So that's really strong. Though this kind of giving your sorceries flash is cool, I would also argue it's kind of not that important in a deck like this. I think it's kind of neat. Being able to cast Supreme Verdict at instant speed is really going to be the thing I think you'll like to do, but otherwise, you're generally just trying to keep Teferi around. The -3, of course, is also very nice. You can use it to get extra effects, or you can use it to change lock pieces, and of course, use against your opponent. Like, fantastic card. I think absolutely belongs here. If you've ever played a format 60 cards with Teferi in it, you know this card has a reputation, which means it is great for Stax. Another one that I think is very much so worth considering is Harbinger of the Seas. Once again, we're playing at bracket 4. We're not here to make friends. We're here to teach people deep lessons about mana bases and what they should be doing. Harbinger of the Seas is here to remind you of that, and she does an excellent job just locking down all your opponent's cards. Like, basically, if they run 3 colors or more and none of them are blue, or blue is not the primary color, they might be just completely locked out of the game, and that is phenomenal work for one card. It also is one of those situations, I bring this up a lot, that it might divide your opponents, where one opponent is less affected by the Harbinger, whereas another one is, and the one that's less affected might be incentivized to leave the Harbinger alone because it hurts another opponent more. These are the kind of things that allows Stax to make it into the late game where it excels. Kataki War's Wage. I recently played Kataki in a game of Commander, and I was reminded how phenomenal this card is. I think some people think that you need to play next to no artifacts for this to be good, like, you know, to avoid that nombo, and I say no. I say play as many artifacts as you want, because you're in Stax and you're only dropping this card when it benefits you. So if you are the one with the most artifacts, you just won't cast it, but your opponents that depend on those artifacts, especially if they generate mana or fix their colors, all of a sudden they're in a situation where they are staxed even further. Fantastic card. This creature does so much work, and I really recommend it. This is pretty close to Thalia levels of that I would recommend it in most mono white or multicolor white decks because of the sheer ceiling of this card's power. Speaking of, I guess, taxing, Aven Interrupter is a card that I've really started to like when in Modern, but also in all formats. It has two distinct abilities that are both very good for the Stax deck. One, being able to plot spells, which means that when you exile your opponent's spell on the stack, it goes into the exile zone, and on future turns, not the turn it was cast, they can cast it for free at sorcery speed. Not only does this work as a kind of remand effect, it also actually nullifies counter magic, which Aven Interrupter really excels at taking out, because a sorcery speed counterspell does nothing. So therefore, you're always in a situation that this is like a really good hit. However, when you hit something else, that second clause that says spells your opponents cast from graveyards or exile cost 2 more to cast, at least generates some taxation, pressuring your opponents and pressuring their mana. But, and this is really important, is that this second line of text that I haven't fully highlighted is just good. It's just good by itself. It just does a lot of work. Once again, in Commander, we are generally accepting that our opponents are going to be playing graveyard decks to an extent, but also Red's Impulse Draw mechanic, which means, you know, exiling cards and casting them from exile, has become exceedingly popular in cards, and this just hoses that really hard. Because the main thing that makes Impulse Draw good is that you can cast it right away. If you can't cast it, they tend to evaporate because you just lose the ability to cast them, they stay in exile. And Aven Interrupter punishes that, so all of a sudden your opponents are exiling cards for nothing. The keen part of Impulse Draw, which is that's cheaper than real draw, but temporary, immediately goes out the window. It's fantastic. Aven Interrupter is a phenomenal card, and this is another card that I really recommend in a lot of white decks. So, Give Some Given is unbanned, 100% unbanned, and this is the kind of deck that I want to see it in 100% of the time. Because, you know, there's cute kind of like combos you can do, there's fun value things you can do, but Give Some Given and putting 4 Ghostly Prison effects into this is the exact kind of thing you want to do, right? This solves a lot of problems that the deck has very cleanly. And since we're in bracket 4, does not matter. No one's going to bat an eyelid at this. You're just going to show up and say, hey, I'm casting Give Some Given, and they'll say, cool, that makes sense. So really phenomenal card, and the ability to actually get to play it, I think, is really fun. So I would take advantage of it. Who knows if it'll get banned? I don't think so, but it could. If that's the case, you know, play with it while you still can. Winter Moon's just here as, like, you could play it as an additional Arctic Moon effect, or like, you know, like to hate people's lands out even further. You're playing a lot of basics. I think you're generally safe on this. So I think it is absolutely worth considering. It's not as strong. I said Arctic Moon. No, it is Arctic Moon. Hold on. We're going to have a moment while I check. Winter Orb. I got him backward. Winter Orb and Winter Moon are like cousins. And sometimes one's going to be better than the other, but Winter Moon doing kind of like imitation is pretty good, and you're going to be pretty happy with it. You don't need to. This is kind of like iffy, but I think it's pretty strong. Going into like higher mana stuff that we consider finishers, Godfarer's Statue is really cool, and I think does not get the credit it deserves. That first line of text that makes your opponent's spells cost 2 more is really strong. It's really strong. I really can't just keep saying that, but I want to. You have to see this in action. It can completely shut down decks at a certain point, especially since this is a deck that already just goes for deeper and deeper into this kind of pool of taxing spells. But it's just that it's 2. It's just so rare to get that 2. That's why it's so good. And you might have said, well, Curse, this isn't a win condition. It is. It says at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. So if you do lock the game out completely, you can point at your God-Pharaoh statue, look at your opponents and go, I pass my next 40 turns. Like, it does work. I don't know if everyone loves that, but it is something that happens, right? People always say, well, if you're gonna lock us out of the game, you might as well have a win condition. Otherwise, yeah, here it is. 1 damage a turn for 40 turns. 10 out of 10. I love it. After that, I think an option, I don't really like it the more I think of it, but I did want to note Nexus of Fate is a card you could play and at a certain point in the game feasibly loop just by having so few cards in your deck. Is that fun? I don't know. This would be the definition, like it would be like Nexus of Fate and God-Pharaoh statue as a combination. This could be really, really mean. I don't think your opponents will talk to you again, but it is a card that does have quite a bit of value, especially because this allows you to kind of cut in the middle of the turn cycle, which can allow you to place different Stax pieces at different turn times. I don't know. This is suspect, but I think it's neat and I wanted to suggest it. This might be the card that I'm thinking of the most. Knowledge Pool is a very, very good combo with a number of cards, including 3 Fairy, in this deck. Basically, what it forces is that every time you create a pool of spells, and then every time a player casts a spell, Knowledge Pool says, no, you don't get to cast that. It goes in the pool and now casts something else out of the pool. But when you have all of those spells that say players can only cast 1 spell a turn, or Teferi that says players can only cast a spell at a certain time, Knowledge Pool is now locked out, like let's lock them out of casting a spell for the rest of it. This does not mean you cannot be stopped. Do not forget this. Combat damage, like channeling or discard abilities, any abilities of cards will still work. Boseiju is the channeling ability I'm thinking of that can destroy Knowledge Pool, so that's a way you can be stopped. And Planeswalkers and a few other things can still get around. It's like, don't think you're perfect, but you're pretty close, right? The one you want to use is 3 Fairy because it still allows you to cast other spells, whereas all of the other, like Eidolon of the Rhetoric, Rule of Law effects, will lock you as well as your opponents out of the game. However, on a long enough time frame where no one's casting spells, you'll eventually get 3 Fairy, start upticking, downtick on your Eidolon of Rhetoric, put it back in your hand, and all of a sudden, bam, you can cast spells again, right? Like, well, you've got time. So this feels like a very, very strong card. I think it also causes a lot of chaos around the point of the game that you're about to get your lock in. It's just catching me that I do believe this also doubles your tax, right? I could be wrong about this, and tell me in the comments if I am, but if you cast a spell with tax, you have to pay the Thalia tax or the Grand Arbiter tax, and then if you want to cast a free spell, the tax still applies, so your opponents do get double tax. So this is just, it's just good. It's just good to play out, and it's a lock that wins you the game. If you're going to play one of these cards, play this one. I think one of the last ones I want to talk about before the good cards is Spark Double. It's just straightforwardly a copy of Grand Arbiter or any other of your creature lock pieces or 3 Fairy. Just really good, just redundancy, fantastic. Don't really need to get into it. It's a good card. The last one I want to talk about is Clarion Conqueror. This very specifically is a card I've grown very, very fond of because this net it throws of turning off artifact abilities, creature abilities, and planeswalker abilities. It's a big net, and you are the kind of deck that generally doesn't use activate abilities, more static abilities, so you benefit more. But one Clarion Conqueror can shut down so many strategies. Very, very efficient. It's actually a pretty good beater as a 3/3 with evasion, and you don't mind attacking with it. So I really like this card. I think it's absolutely worth testing, and if you haven't played with it, I really recommend it. It's phenomenal. Okay. Last bit, the boring stuff is that obviously this deck would benefit from Esper Sentinel, obviously would benefit from Smothering Tide. Drannith Magistrate is an amazing card. That's the last one. I'm sure there's another game changer that I've forgotten that you could throw on the list. Just, you know what these are about, right? These are just incredibly powerful game changer cards that are just really, really strong. I just realized Esper Sentinel is not a game changer. I always thought it was. Very, very strong effects on these, and you should leverage them in a game of Commander at this power level. And that's it. I am going to cut this as fast as possible. This deck is great. I love Stax. I love seeing these kind of decks so you can get good at playing with them or good at playing against them. Thank you so much to the deck builder for setting this. And if you are a player who hasn't really liked Stax and you've stuck around for this video, let me know and thank you. Like, it's good to look at things that you don't like. It's good to expand your horizons, even if the only benefit there is that when you see them on the streets, you know how to deal with them, because that's where we play Magic. We play Magic on the streets. Thank you so much. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.